Well, from analysis, let me turn to Yuval Weber. He's a research assistant professor at Texas A&M's Bush School of Government and Public Service here in Washington. Yuval, you and I have talked about this crisis from literally weeks after it started. China's peace plan, let me begin with that. Zelensky of Ukraine, President Zelensky, called it a declaration. And from what our reporter Nathan King said to us from the White House a short time ago, the White House is not really taking this any seriously. Talk about this peace proposal, if you will, and if China could actually play a constructive role in this.
Sure. Obviously the White House has one position, and Zelensky of Ukraine didn't reject it out of hand, I think, in deference to the role that China may be able to play. But ultimately, if the context and the content of the peace declaration, or sort of like the peace plan, is for Ukraine to accept giving up its territories, no matter how polite Zelensky is going to be in saying no, he's not going to accept that for several reasons. One, he'd be out of office probably later that afternoon. Because of what the Ukrainian people have clearly indicated is that any amount of their territory that is under Russian control basically results in like the human rights atrocities seen in Bucha and things of that nature. So fundamentally, Ukraine is seeking to retake its territory. And the resolution of this conflict will be at what point they're no longer able to credibly retake territory, and at what point Russia effectively collapses and is no longer able to sustain its presence on Ukrainian territory. Whatever China is going to do has to basically respond to those realities of the two combatants.
I thought it was interesting that the first thing this 12-point plan actually mentions is it calls for respecting the sovereignty of all countries. But okay, moving on from this, why is it that only a handful of countries, Yuval, are actually talking about some kind of peace settlement? Turkey's Erdogan has brought it up. Brazil's Lula Silva has talked about it. Now China is talking about it. Why aren't more countries in the Western developing world talking about some kind of solution here?
Sure, again, so peace sounds great, sovereignty sounds great, but what it comes down to in the reality here is, for example, Russia has annexed territories of Ukraine that it doesn't militarily control. So what's more important, Russia's basically paper sovereignty or the territory that Ukraine has that was its own before this conflict? So any of those peace plans that don't recognize Ukraine wants its territory back and Russia's trying to create a new norm where one big country invades another and then uses the threat of nuclear warfare in order to hold on to that territory. If that's essentially the new norm and the new definition of sovereignty, you can then see that there's going to be very little buy-in from much of the world onto going away from the traditional notions of territoriality, autonomy, and sovereignty being you get to control your own territory, your own borders, no matter what the, let's say, inquisitive neighbors would like.
I'm going to ask you the same question I asked you when this first started. What is Vladimir Putin's endgame at this point? And have Western sanctions on Russia really moved the needle in any way to change anything?
Sure. So roughly a year ago when you posed that question, I think I answered something in effect of he doesn't want, to govern all of Ukraine in terms of paying for it, but he wants a relationship with Ukraine that Russia had for a great number of decades, if not centuries, but basically what Russia has with Belarus right now. Belarus governs itself, but all of its major foreign security decisions, foreign economic policy decisions, those are basically either made in Moscow or approved in Moscow. Mm-hmm. That's what Putin wanted out of Ukraine, out of Kyiv, and that's what he still wants. In terms of whether he's able to do that, this is basically, the prediction that I'll make for, this year and the next, is that effectively Putin is mortgaging Russia's future, its economic ability to continue as a modern economy, as a modern nation. All of Russia's money is going to be using basically what we see out of their military budget now, what we see out of their domestic spending and so forth. Russia's going to have 1, 2, perhaps 3 years at most of continuing the status quo. And when that's done, Russia will be bankrupt to the extent that what we saw in 1998 or maybe 1993 before, they'll simply run out of money and they'll have an international crisis that resembles those experiences from the 1990s, or perhaps, in more recent memory, what we've seen in places like Argentina or Greece in recent years. And that's essentially what Putin is, what he's basically threatening. He's basically willing to wager Russia's entire future to win this war in the short to medium term. And that's effectively what he's got on offer versus the Ukrainians.
Yeah, and so many innocent people are paying the price. Yuval Weber, thank you.